Superbikes are the pinnacle of motorcycling technology. It's here that manufacturers push the boundaries of performance, taking everything that they've learned of racing at the highest level and delivering models that we can all enjoy. Beside me is the Aprilia RSV4 Factory, the winner of Cycle World's last Superbike shootout. Next is the BMW M1000 RR, Motorrad's homologation special aimed at World Superbike competition. And finally, the Ducati Panigale V4 SP2, Bologna's ultimate track day weapon. We're here at Thunderhill Raceway Park, and we've fitted each of these machines with the latest and greatest Pirelli Diablo Superbike slick. We're here to find out which is the best Superbike of 2022.
We are back after 2 excellent days of testing, and alongside me I got in-market editor Bradley Adams and senior editor of Motorcyclist magazine Adam Wahid. Man, this was a really fun test.
Woo-wee, what a blast.
These are some incredible motorcycles.
Absolutely,
Pinch
absolutely.
me.
These are seriously the most premium superbikes you can buy.
Yeah, they feel like race bikes. You know, I think all the manufacturers have done a good job of taking all the technology, packaging it up into something that is, you know, technically street legal, but just incredible motorcycles right around the track.
Right, they're more track focused than anything.
The amount of progression we've seen in the Superbike class in this last few years, it's unbelievable how high performance these vehicles are. You just go buy them. We weren't even at 1/10 of the capability
right.
of any of these bikes.
Right. You weren't.
Yeah. But it's really amazing how high performance they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you're going to speak superbikes, you got to talk power.
Yep.
And these motorcycles made a lot of it. To get it out, the Aprilia, the biggest horsepower, that was 189.7, almost 190 horsepower stock. No modifications. Other motorcycles, the Ducati Panigale V4 SP2 was 182 horsepower, and the BMW 179. Now, I know you guys had some interesting comments about how these bikes made power, or maybe where they didn't, starting at the BMW.
Yeah.
That really interesting dip that we've seen even on the S1000 RR is now on the M1000 RR, but between 6,000 and 8,000, that really kind of made you ride it like almost like a 2-stroke, you could say.
Yeah, it definitely changed your riding style a little bit. You had to ride around that, which is unfortunate. I think when you spend this much money on a motorcycle, on a modern motorcycle, I think, I understand, regulations on bikes and the emission stuff that they have to deal with, but it is tough when you spend this much money on a motorcycle and you do have to kind of adapt to it because of, a bit of a shortcoming there.
And how do you adapt to it?
Yeah, so for me, there was a couple places at Thunderhill where you actually had to go down an extra gear compared to other motorcycles, and it was sections of the track where maybe I would not have been going down. In this case, it was into first gear, because it makes a little bit more work as you get off of the corner, and you have to kind of short shift and get through the gears a little bit so you're not spinning the tire up too much. But if I left it in second gear, coming off of those tight left-handers, it was too soft. It helped to get that nice drive coming off in first gear, but it's a little bit more work, which on these bikes you're already working a lot, to manage them. So
absolutely. And on the other opposite side of it is the Aprilia, which made the most horsepower, but didn't really feel like it did. It was so linear that getting off the corner was really kind of easy.
Yeah, I was surprised that it made the most amount of horsepower. I don't know about your experience.
It did back in 2019 too. The Aprilia has really never been a slouch since they went to the 1100 cc format, and even more so with the extra torque the engine has now. But it was interesting because even though it is the fastest, it didn't feel the fastest. And I remember we were talking about that one section in Thunderhill, the double lefts. On the other bikes, you grab fourth gear going in that second left.
Yeah,
on the Aprilia, it wouldn't pull fourth gear.
Right.
Even though it's got good mid-range, it just, I don't know if fourth gear was too tall or if the mid-range is a little bit flatter than the other bikes, but you had to have it in third gear and rev it out.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things. I mean, I think the gearing is a little bit taller because I actually noticed that as well going up the front straight on the Aprilia.
Same thing.
But and I know looking at the dyno charts that peak torque comes in like 1,000 RPM higher than the other bike.
Yep, you could feel that.
Yeah, it's kind of sneaky how fast the bike is, or you just don't really realize that, again, that it is the most powerful bike of the group. So.
Totally.
And there are other things. I think the weight plays a little bit of a role in that too. I know you measured all the bikes.
Yep.
And,
Absolutely.
Aprilia's got a little bit more weight on it, right?
A little bit more weight. But going back to that, let's keep talking power.
Power.
The Panigale V4 SP2 is kind of right there in the center, 182 horsepower, but you guys felt the power of the Panigale.
My God.
It's eye-opening.
That thing just melts your face off. Like, every time I ride that bike, I literally feel like the engine's gonna explode because it's just revving and revving. And when it's revving, it's not just making noise, it's building power and shooting you forward. Like, thank God they put that big green light on the dash so you know when to shift. Because if it wasn't for that, you would just be keep revving it and revving it and revving it and revving it.
Right. Also, I think one of the big things there, I think one of the things I really like about that power plant is the power delivery is so linear. I mean, you have it from the second you open the throttle coming off the corner, and then it just continues making power
and
all the way through.
And it had mid-range. Those Ducati, that bike never has mid-range. It had mid-range.
Yeah.
Like, it would pull third gear, it would pull lower gear.
Yeah, really direct from the time you roll off the corner, and then I think in the highest power mode, which I like. I don't know if it's
they had the full, the high, and the low.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, I started off in low, and the thing felt fast, you know, and then you just keep ramping up and going higher, and you get into the highest power mode, and like you get to the end of the front straight, and it's just like everything is flying past you so quick. Absolutely. It's just an incredible experience.
And just like we talked about this before, but just, you know, that's what really separates Ducati from the other manufacturers, just that sound and that character. You know, I was watching MotoGP this weekend. The MotoGP bikes that those guys are riding, they sound, when I'm watching on television, they sound just like that bike we rode, just like it.
It's an emotional experience. Like, from the second you fire,
very visceral,
this SP2 up, and with the dry clutch and everything, just that sound, and then it's, you know, firing on the 2 cylinders, and then you click it into gear, and it's just like that whole thing just from
a very raw package.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah,
you know, kudos to Ducati. I mean, they've been talking the talk for a long time about them and racing, but they're walking the walk. They always have, and they always will.
Right. And you know, we talk about power, but it's still a very rideable motorcycle. You can hustle the thing around a racetrack, and it doesn't feel like it's out of hand.
I think that also lends itself to the electronics package that they have as well, right?
Well, they took a big step forward for the 2022 model year with that V4S. You know, I got to ride it at the intro this past winter, and I didn't really realize how much of a step forward that was until we rode them with the other bikes.
Absolutely.
I'm like, wow, like, just like their torque saturation maps, they're improved, the electronics. If there was a most improved Superbike from 2019 when we rode them last time, that would be the bike.
Are you talking about electronics or kind of
just the whole package? The whole package.
Yeah. But I think you look at the Ducati dash, you can see exactly what setting each of the systems are in, and
the green light.
The green light. Yeah, and it's little stuff actually too. Like the Ducati representatives talked to us about the way they ended up on that layout, right? And so it was actually some of their riders, their GP guys, actually talking about, you know, the benefit of having these systems, and they're color coded, and when a system activates, you know, that color stays on, it stays solid for a little bit, so you know, hey, the system's working, versus just a little, you know, a little light flashing or something at you, which I think is, you know, credit to them taking, you know, working with their Superbike teams or their GP teams to understand kind of what's working on that end.
In action, what did that feel like on the track? How was the traction control? How was the slide control? Engine brake?
I would say overall the Ducati just feels very refined. Everything feels very refined. You can feel some of the action. I remember at Thunder Hill, turn 1 is a big place. You start to get a little bit of a, you know, the front wheel starts to come up over a rise, and so you can feel the wheelie control activate. And I remember there were a couple laps, the front wheel starts to come up, and you feel just a nice little cut that keeps it from coming up any higher. And then there's a next little cut to drop the front tire back down, versus like one very aggressive cut that slams the front wheel back down. So the biggest thing that I noticed there was it keeps you driving forward. It doesn't, like, you know, bring an end to the whole party and just be like, hey, we're gonna keep this safe here. It's just, you're still driving forward, which I think helps with lap times.
And I know that, you know, at the test, you were commenting on the other side of it with the Aprilia, feeling maybe a little bit more rudimentary, maybe a little inconsistent with that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I hate to say any of these systems are rudimentary, because they've done such a good job of refining them over the years.
Splitting hairs.
You know, I think the biggest thing for me is the systems didn't feel as consistent, and I guess what I mean by that is lap after lap, I felt like maybe it responded a little bit differently. There's probably something to the rider element of that too, where maybe not, I'm not being as consistent lap after lap, and it's giving the systems different data. You know, for sure, like with the Ducati, I felt like I knew exactly what it was going to do each time. And with the Aprilia, there was a couple of laps in a row, I remember, where the front end would start to come up, and I thought, oh, okay, the system should start bringing this back down. And it would, you know, go a little bit higher that time than the time before. And
Interesting.
so maybe just not quite as consistent for me. I felt like I didn't have as much faith lap after lap, so I know exactly what this is going to do. So
where does the BMW sit in all that?
Well, BMW, I mean, for me, it was kind of hard to get a good gauge on that BMW just because of that, you know, second and third gear, you know, HP map where it's got the torque flat spot. You know, and you have to ride the bike. We talked about it all the way to first gear, all the way to fifth gear, all the way to first gear. A lot of work, you know, and when you're giving that thing the beans, you know, like that thing makes crazy power and it kind of hits hard compared to the other bikes. There was a time I remember distinctly, I came out of like turn 2 and I'm giving her the beans and it's not really going, and it felt like it was hesitating, like some kind of traction control or something. So I just pushed that -2 button right there on the left-hand side switch gear. -2, -2, -2, go down to minus whatever, 4 or something from baseline.
-4 is about where we were riding most of the time. Yeah,
I love the on-the-fly finite DTC adjustment. The Aprilia has it, and it's really easy to use with its paddle shifters. Ducati has it now too, but it's a little bit more hokey pokey. You got to make sure you're in the right menu. I like that the Aprilia and the BMW have a dedicated button that always does that. Doesn't matter what mode you're in. You press down, it's going to give you less traction control. You press up, it's going to give you more traction control. And that's a big deal.
It's a small thing, but I will say, like the BMW, the way the dash is laid out, it's a little bit harder, I think, to see what the setting and stuff. So I do remember, again, it's a small thing, but as you're riding and you wanted to adjust the settings, it took a little extra focus to, okay, click, make sure I've got the new traction control setting that I want. And again, goes back to, I think something Ducati's done really good is designing the dash layout where everything's very readily apparent. And Aprilia too, they've kind of gone the opposite end where you just see the traction control and wheelie control setting in the bottom left, but it's a nice big readout and it's very easy to adjust.
That display was a big update for Aprilia. You know, in a way, I almost like the Aprilia display a little bit better, at least when you're navigating the menu in the pits, because that dang Ducati, like always, you have to go in the menu, take your setting, exit, go out. You know, the Aprilia and the BMW, they just save it. You don't have to go out of the menu, and it just makes for less poking around when you're in between sessions.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the action of these things on the racetrack too. I know we've touched on the Aprilia, the Ducati, we've touched a little bit on the BMW. I know one thing that everyone is really kind of talking about was the ability to adjust engine braking on these bikes for corner entries.
Hallelujah.
Corner entry, and the BMW made maybe the biggest impact.
Yeah, although I will actually say, the Ducati 2A made some changes there, which I guess we'll get into in a second. But the BMW, it was funny at the end of the day, you know, we were kind of going in between some settings. I mistakenly asked for a different setting on engine brake control a little bit. It was freewheeling in a little bit more, and it's incredible the difference you notice.
Totally.
It's one thing to have those settings and to be able to maximize the potential of the bike. It's just nice to see the refinement of these systems where they're making a difference, right? You can change a setting and you immediately notice the difference. And I think that
there's a big range of adjustment in these motorcycles. You know, if you're someone who hauls a lot of butt and you want that extra bit of momentum, no engine brake. You know, if you're like us and you need a little bit of help slowing down the vehicle, lots of engine brake. And there's a lot of difference in that setting.
Well, I think it's going to help you get into the corner, right? It's all about corner entry, and then once you're in, we got to talk chassis. All of these bikes have phenomenal chassis, and the Ducati and the BMW even have carbon fiber wheels. The Aprilia is the only one here that does not have carbon wheels, and they just have forged aluminum.
Right, just.
But a big thing we were talking about at the test was the difference in effort to get these things around the racetrack. I know that the Ducati and the BMW were a bit more precise and maybe easier to get through transitions, whereas the Aprilia is significantly heavier, plus the lack of those carbon wheels. You feel that getting around a racetrack.
Yeah, the Aprilia is definitely not, it doesn't feel heavy when you're riding it, but compared to those two bikes, it's like you kept saying that, oh, it feels a little sluggish. And again, you can't say the Aprilia is sluggish because it's not, but compared to those bikes, it kind of is a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. You get on that Ducati, and you know, even just on your out lap, you go through some of the tighter sections, and the thing just goes like right to the bottom, you know.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference when you're riding around at speed on these bikes, you know. Especially you get into a tighter section, like Thunderhill has a couple tight little transitions, and it's just easier to get right to the bottom, you know. That next, you know, you make that side to side transition, and then even like turn 2 at Thunderhill, big sweeping wide, you know, left-hander, and you want to get to the bottom, you know, get to the apex as you know, about to finish off the corner, and you don't have to put a bunch of weight into it or anything. It just goes right to the bottom. And
that Ducati loved to be leaned over. It just
it's
wanted
pretty,
to be leaned over.
It's pretty confidence inspiring. If I may add, Cycle World testing legend Don Kane dragged his elbow for the first time at 61 years old.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It likes being leaned over.
That's the bike to do it on, for sure. I mean, the chassis, and again, we keep going back to kind of feeling these, you know, GP or World Superbike roots in these bikes, and I think the Ducati, you feel it most in the chassis. I mean, it's still a handful. It's still a lot of motorcycle, but they've done a really good job developing the chassis.
I still really like, though, the BMW. Like, I really appreciate how precise that bike felt. Like, it was very precise, and where you put it on track, it's almost like if a Japanese manufacturer made the best inline four precise superbike, and that would be the bike. But
very
instead of
traditional
Japanese
feel.
bike, BMW did.
Yeah, very traditional kind of chassis feel to it, and gives you a lot of confidence. You know, I think I'd argue you could almost be a little bit more consistent on the BMW.
It's very precise, man. I thought so. It's very precise.
Yeah, you know, the Ducati, you put the wrong input into it or something, and I think you'll definitely feel it, and it does feel a little bit stiffer overall between chassis and suspension, where the BMW is a little bit more forgiving.
Well, I think when we talk consistency too, is that the BMW is the only bike here that doesn't have semi-active suspension. Strictly Marzocchi front end, Marzocchi rear end, and this is what you got.
Right.
So it's a racing front end. Whereas I know that most of the time you guys were riding in manual modes anyway.
Yeah.
But this is a very traditional racing inspired suspension system.
Yeah, and you could tell they've been developing this bike for a long time, right? And they're pretty happy with their settings and where they know things should be, and the geometry and everything on it. So I think it's they've got a really good base setup, and it's a very confidence-inspiring motorcycle.
I really like the suspension action on that BMW. That was the thing that was probably one of my favorite features of that bike. Was just when you got on the brakes, that front end would just go down and then stay there and come up, and it was so controlled. It was really impressive, you know.
Now, what about the Aprilia? Because I heard a lot of talk about a weave or wallow, especially on corner exit, where that thing just kind of felt like it became unhinged, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely struggled a little bit with the bike feeling a little soft in the rear. And when you've got as much power, well, it's kind of an issue that's exacerbated by the throttle connection. It's a little bit sharper than the other bikes, and then combine that with the rear end, which felt a little bit softer. And the second you'd crack the throttle, you kind of load the rear a little bit more, and you had the tendency to slide the rear a little bit more because once you put that load to it. It definitely wasn't as planted, I would say. Now, I think you ended up, by the end of the day, we adjusted the suspension a little bit, added some compression, I think, to the rear, and that helped for sure. But
yeah, it was really interesting because we were riding the Aprilia, and I couldn't believe coming into turn one, right before you were about to brake, the bike was real floaty. It was hard for me to even actuate the brake, because when I started actuating the brake, it'd be like, oh, and then it would feel like it would kind of want to endo a little bit. And I'm like, God, this is so weird. So I asked the Aprilia guy to make some mechanical changes to the suspension, and that didn't change anything. And then after riding the Ducati a little bit, I went, and the Ducati worked so good, I went in the settings menu, and I'm like, oh, what are the Ducati settings? Oh, they're all maxed out. No wonder the Ducati's working so good. So then I went on the Aprilia at the very end, and I maxed out all the damping settings on that thing. And that gave a lot more favorable feel. You know, we talked about the nice fixed suspension on the Beamer, but kudos to Ducati and Aprilia with their semi-active suspension systems and how much range of adjustments in that machine just pushing buttons.
Absolutely.
You know,
yeah, it's nice when you own a bike like that where you can just go in the dash. You maybe don't have to have the screwdriver. And kind of get lost in those settings there. So
yeah, it was neat, and maxing out that settings really, I noticed a difference. It was much better.
Yeah.
So
you know,
it's neat.
One thing really cool about the Aprilia this year compared to RSV4s in the past, which I remember some earlier generation RSV4s, we would just grind the fairings down. Like the ground clearance was pretty minimal on those things, and they've done a good job with this latest generation bike. It's got a little bit more ground clearance. I think it's like 1.5 degrees on both sides, and that's obviously helped quite a bit. It's nice, you know, to not be scraping your expensive fairings. And then along those lines, they've made some ergonomic changes too, which overall I think, you know, helps the bike. You feel a little bit more comfortable. And being a taller rider, that bike was always relatively comfortable, but the changes they've made allow you, I think, a little bit more freedom.
Totally.
Through the
That was
corner.
a cozy bike for me to ride. You know, I really like the ergonomics package on that bike.
Yep. Yeah, I think the seat's a little bit lower as well, so you kind of, before you kind of felt like you were up on top of the thing. And
foot peg's a little lower for us tall guys.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I know it's an ergonomics thing, but I think it definitely plays a role in being able to hustle the thing around a racetrack.
Absolutely, and when we talk braking performance of all of these three, Ducati has the best brakes by far, both in terms of power and feel, and I want to hear about that. But then we also struggled with sort of the ergonomics there and not really being able to latch on and hold yourself to the tank, and all your pressure is going through your wrist under that hard deceleration.
Yeah. Did you have that problem on the Ducati, trying to get the thing slowed down?
Well, yeah, like it's so funny because we went to that press introduction and they're like, yeah, we reshaped the fuel tank so it's, you know, easier to maneuver against. And when we were riding at Jerez, you know, I'm like, I never thought anything of it, but to be fair, at Jerez, it's pretty flowy, dude. You're not really grinding on that fuel tank besides that one stopping area on the back side of the track.
Right.
But at Thunder Hill, you're always braking heavily. You know,
there were a couple sections.
There was a couple of times where I thought I was gonna fall off the dang motorcycle.
almost
Dude,
did a couple
grab
of
onto me, I'm gonna fall off. You know, so
Yeah.
it's interesting. You know how they said they took a step forward, but that skinniness in the rear of that fuel tank, I didn't like that as much at Thunder Hill.
Yeah, it's funny, you see some, you know, shots of GP bikes and stuff, and what they've done, you know, for different riders. Everyone has a different feel in the way the bikes are set up, but, you know, it definitely seemed like some of the pads that you see on GP bikes you'd benefit to have that on the Ducati, because there's a couple of times on the first session out on the bike trying to get adapted to it, and you come in, slam on the brakes, and like my whole body's going forward, my feet are coming off the pegs, and
Totally.
yeah, it's a lot.
Well, when you pair the best braking performance of the group with that, you're going to run into that issue.
Yeah.
On the other side of the fence, Aprilia had pretty soft brakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a lot of initial bite.
And it kind of required more lever pull for longer, which might have to do with the significant extra weight that it carries in comparison to the others, but
yeah, it's a good point. You know, definitely it's a little bit more weight to it, and that probably does play a role, but it definitely doesn't seem like the pads have as much bite. I'm sure it's a combination of things in their braking system compared to the others. It's noticeable how much sharper the brakes are on the BMW, and then I think the Ducati's even a step above.
The BMW has those M-branded Nissan calipers, and it's kind of the same story as every even S1000RR in the past, is that it has that almost over-aggressive initial bite.
They were really aggressive on the M1000RR. I've never really experienced a pad combination on a production motorcycle that had that much bite. It was hard for me to almost brake on that bike because I'd brake and I'm like, oh my God, I stopped already. I should be stopping up there, just because those brakes initially, they just bite really hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very unusual feeling for someone who doesn't ride on racing brakes, who just rides street bikes all the time.
Well, absolutely does the Ducati stand out. These are premium superbikes, and the fit and finish of all of these motorcycles is incredible, but especially the Ducati. For $39,500, man, it's a lot of money, but you're getting a lot of motorcycle.
It looks boss, especially in that slick black paint job it has, the carbon fiber wheels, like it looks boss. But so that BMW, like the intricate machining on the engine covers, on the swing arm, like that bike's really well put together too.
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the things we talked about, looking like, I'm trying to understand and think about how these manufacturers develop these bikes. I think one thing with the Ducati, it feels like they co-developed it with the race teams. It feels like they were out developing this bike, you know, alongside as they're doing World Superbike testing, you know? Whereas the BMW kind of feels like maybe they studied what the World Superbike team was doing, came back, you know, made some nice parts and took some of that data and kind of built a nice bike.
Yep. You know, I'm going to keep saying this, but on the other side of the spectrum, the Aprilia, yes, it's cheaper. It's only $26,000.
It's a great deal.
In terms of fit and finish and quality in comparison to the other two motorcycles, you know, even in a short time frame of the last couple of years of it winning the Cycle World Superbike Shootout, it's grown old in many ways.
Yeah, I don't think the all black, I mean, it's got some gold touches on it, but that kind of all black paint scheme and everything, I don't think does it any favors. It's got a lot of this similar lines. Yes, you've got the, kind of built-in winglets and stuff now, but, very similar shape that it's had for years now. So.
It's a great bike, no doubt, and exceptional value in the segment, but look at one of the things that really irks me about that Aprilia, besides the welds kind of irk me too, but if you look at the top clamp yoke, where the Aprilia logo is, it's like stamped on there with a sticker sideways. Like it's not even lined up.
That's a good point. I didn't notice that. Yeah.
Like look at the Ducati and the BMW. Like look at how everything's mounted, the fit and finish. Like those bikes are meticulously crafted by a guy. Like, oh, I'm gonna meticulously craft this vehicle. Where the Aprilia looks like they just like, oh, let's just throw it through the assembly line. There it is, done. You're spending. Of course, it's many thousands of dollars less expensive than the BMW and Ducati, but I think if you're a real high-end person who wants the very best, not only in terms of performance, but just like looking at it when it's in your garage, that's where that BMW and Ducati stand out.
Yeah. I think that we've, as collectively as a group, we've all come to say that for $39,500, the Ducati is the bike to have. Of this group, it is the motorcycle to have. Where would you guys place the other two? BMW Aprilia, Aprilia BMW, where do those sit?
I think the BMW over the Aprilia. I mean, both of those bikes overall are very solid packages. The BMW feels like it offers a little bit more, again, in terms of fit and finish.
Oh yeah.
And I think in terms of performance too. I mean, the Aprilia does make a little bit more power. The BMW it has some of that sharpness that feels like it's missing from the Aprilia. The BMW kind of has a little bit more of that aggression to it, which I think is something that stands out in this class.
Absolutely. All right, Adam, your pick. Aprilia, BMW, Aprilia.
For me, I'm a value-driven guy. I really like what the Aprilia offers for, its MSRP. It's a really good value. I love my BMW S1000 RRs, and this bespoke M1000 RR makes me want it even more, but I just can't ignore just the real good value that Aprilia offers. It checks a lot of boxes for me, just the sound, the power, electronics. It doesn't look quite as, bespoke as the other bikes, but I'm gonna have an extra 10 grand in my pocket to go burn at my favorite restaurant, so that'll be pretty good.
Or the track day.
Yeah, or the next track day. Yeah, you can buy a lot of Pirelli
tires.
Diablo Super Corsa slicks with MGs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you guys have it. The Ducati Panigale V4 SP2 is the winner of this year's Cycle World Superbike Shootout for $39,500. That's a lot of money, but you get a lot of motorcycle. Phenomenal power delivery, an excellent electronics package, and a chassis that balances it all out. Yes, the ergonomics could be improved a little bit. The tank shape could be revised to keep some pressure away from your wrists on the hard deceleration, but overall, seriously a remarkable motorcycle. If you guys like this video, give us a like, comment, we want to hear from you, and subscribe to the Cycle World YouTube channel. Head over to cycleworld.com, read the full story, and we'll see you guys next time.